20 years ago, Hurricane Katrina flooded hundreds of thousands of homes in New Orleans.
When Hurricane Katrina made landfall in 2005, the storm killed over 1,800 people and left millions of people displaced.
As it turned out, it wasn't so much the hurricane that devastated New Orleans. It was the failure of the levees that were supposedly protecting the city.
In the aftermath, the city's problem with blight intensified. Approximately 25% of the city's housing stock was vacant or abandoned.
As people started to come back in and redevelop, property values shot up like crazy.
We've got an affordability crisis.
We also still have a tremendous number of houses that have not been rebuilt and some not even touched since the storm 20 years ago.
Some parts of the city, like the Superdome, have bounced back quickly. 30,000 people sheltered in the building after the storm.
Get us out of here! We want to get out of here!
It was just crisis after crisis.
The U.S. government has so far spent billions to rebuild homes, restore infrastructure, and fortify the levee system.
We've improved over 300 plus miles of levees. We've rebuilt over 71 miles of barrier islands.
At the heart of the plan was a $15 billion upgrade for the region's hurricane protection system. But the Army Corps says billions more may be needed to counteract the region's slow descent into the sea. Meanwhile, insurance premiums are spiking in disaster-prone areas like California, Florida, and Louisiana. CNBC traveled to New Orleans ahead of the Super Bowl to investigate. How can a city rebuild its neighborhoods as it sinks? When Hurricane Katrina made landfall in 2005, New Orleans proper incurred an estimated $40 billion in damages. Few areas were more affected than the lower Ninth Ward. Just 1/3 of the population returned to the neighborhood as of 2023.
There was always a feeling that we were on the other side of the canal. Sewer systems weren't what you thought would be. There were public spaces we couldn't access.
Major industrial waterways were built in this area at various points of the 20th century. The Army Corps was responsible for the floodwalls that failed.
This is probably the hardest hit area of the city with the amount of water that came in.
Calvin Alexander has lived near the lower Ninth Ward for decades in a higher elevation neighborhood called Holy Cross.
In my house, I think we probably had 4 or 5 feet of water in the house. We had private insurance. We also had flood insurance. And the private insurance was so slow in settling the claims. We went ahead and took the flood insurance money, replaced my roof and gutters. And it actually was over 5 years before the insurance company settled that claim.
In the lower elevation parts of the neighborhood, many homeowners couldn't afford to rebuild.
It's not financially viable to make investments without subsidies in the lower Ninth Ward because it costs now more to build the house than it is worth.
And of course, whenever there's a storm where there's major damage, building materials go up. I can remember, for example, a roll of wire to rewire your electricity. At the beginning of the storm, a roll of that wire ran about $175, $180. Within 2.5 years, that was $400 a roll. Everything shot up that way.
Official records show relatively low rates of new housing construction in most years since Katrina. As a result, New Orleans is now facing a housing crisis, particularly in neighborhoods on high ground like Holy Cross. The assessed value of Mr. Alexander's property has more than tripled since 2005. In the same time frame, home prices across the metro area have increased nearly 71%, and national home prices have increased 84%.
Property value in some instances have really increased.
Brenda Bro is the executive director of the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority. The group acquires distressed and vacant properties and repurposes them. They've turned blighted properties into new housing, federally backed health centers, and community space.
We had nearly 6,000 vacant lots and in some instances properties across the city of New Orleans. Today, we're right under 1,000, about 968 properties remaining.
Most of the remaining properties are in low-income areas. The typical household in New Orleans earns $55,000 a year. That's lower than the national median. The biggest industries in New Orleans are trade, transportation, and utilities, alongside education, health, leisure, and hospitality. In recent years, the job market within New Orleans has been tepid at best. Economists at LSU believe that the trend will continue into 2025.
We're a tourist city. People turning over hotel room beds, people pouring drinks in the French Quarter. We're not going to support any of those folks. We're just going to take their houses away from them, give them nowhere to live that's affordable, and still rely on them and their work to keep this economy, the machinery of this city's economy functioning. It's outrageous.
To help New Orleans residents rebuild their homes after Katrina, the state of Louisiana created a program.
And the program is called the Road Home Program. It's the largest housing reconstruction project in U.S. history.
The program, partly financed by the federal government, provided over $9 billion in compensation to homeowners. They could use the cash to rebuild, or they could take the money and turn the property over to the government. The Road Home Program was criticized for its complexity and its role in making it harder for low-income families to rebuild.
Instead of basing settlements on damage to property and estimated cost to rebuild, they threw out all of that data and went with pre-storm property value instead. So if you owned a home in a low wealth neighborhood, like, let's say the lower Ninth Ward, your property value was immediately something like 25% of the average.
Many of the properties left abandoned after road home payouts were transferred to the Redevelopment Authority.
Nora is faced with a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous problem after the storm. They own entire neighborhoods essentially, and they had to figure out how do we get these properties back into commerce without completely shocking the market.
We were thoughtful when we disposed of those properties. We made properties available to individuals who were the adjacent property owners.
You had an opportunity to double the land area that you had. And fundamentally, it ends up really benefiting some neighborhoods and not others.
The terms of the program left many low-income residents with large debts. The federal government forgave those debts in 2023. Still, many homeowners in the area struggle to afford repair and maintenance for their rooftops, windows, and siding.
You have a lot of blighted property, empty property. Give them a little grant, and we come here to fix the house, and you have somewhere to stay. We would have no homeless. That'll solve all the problems with homelessness.
The land that became New Orleans started as a trading post on high ground along the Mississippi River. The city grew out from the French Quarter into nearby swamps with the introduction of pumping systems. As a result, about half of the city sits below sea level. Low-lying areas flood often.
It'll flood cars, it'll keep people from getting to work, it'll flood homes. It is not a federal issue, but will take probably continued federal investment to get out of.
Making matters worse, the population is still declining quickly. A declining population means a declining tax base and funding issues within local government.
Pre-Katrina, the city had 503,000 people. We're at 356,000 now.
As a result, the city government, the municipal government, needs to raise a lot more money, which means property taxes increase pretty regularly for people, which is a big burden.
We've always underfunded, and we've always developed in contrary to what nature says we should do.
Flood insurance policies in New Orleans cost about $800 a year on average. That's actually less than what it should be to cover the risks associated with property, according to the federal government. Many other parts of the Gulf Coast have this problem too. Even if the government spends billions to preserve the coast, large swaths of land could disappear. As parts of the region sink, the Army Corps is led on rebuilding its flood protection systems.
And so it is a complex system of levees, floodgates, pump stations, and flood walls that really help to protect New Orleans and reduce risk.
The state plans to spend $50 billion over the next 50 years to update the system. The system got a test when Hurricane Ida made landfall in 2021.
Ida did impact New Orleans to some degree, but as you look across the coast, they were impacted obviously more. And so what we're seeing now from building these systems is that we're getting $7 of benefit for every dollar we spend on these hurricane protection systems.
The pumps that we have now and the levee protection system that we have now is exponentially better than what we had. But as we go further into an era of more severe rain, no system in the world can keep up with that volume of water.
Meanwhile, today's leaders in Washington are reconsidering how disaster aid is administered.
And we're looking at the whole concept of FEMA. I like, frankly, the concept when North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it, meaning the state takes care of it.
Back at the local level, groups are doing what they can with the resources at their disposal.
If I walk down Aretha Castle Haley, you see a vibrant corridor. I'm not going to suggest that it's 100% or we're complete, but I can certainly tell you from where I sit today, from where we were 12 years ago, you can see the change and the trajectory that has taken place.